How do we develop individuality and creativity and uniqueness in a world where you have 6,000 people in your grade? You have 1,000 people in your block. I'm assuming, let's say you're living in Lakewood, you're living in Muncie, or you're living in San Jose, but you're in a yeshiva that has 500 people. How do you strike a balance between being socially with it and normal and up to date and everyone, you're one of the guys, but you're also an individual and you have your individuality and your imagination, your creativity, which I think are integral components of achieving greatness. I don't mean becoming a gadol hador. I mean, how do someone maintain or create individuality in a world where it's so easy to just be like everyone else?
So I think the challenge you're referring to is really a challenge that, happens in when Bachram are younger, right? If you look at people that are married, 30 years old, 40 years old, we don't really have that question because everyone's doing something different. Everyone has their own family. There's a lot of individuality. But in yeshiva, they're all wearing their white shirts and their hand jacket and they're learning and doing the same thing. And by the way, for that reason, some Bachram try to find individuality through, they can't wear a colored shirt in most yeshivas, but try to find socks. Maybe they could sneak in a black sock with a stripe, whatever. So I can have my individuality.
No, but that's my point. They're screaming.
So I want to explain. But I want to tell those Bachram, and I want to just share the idea. I allow a little bit more in my yeshiva individuality with dress, but the individuality, clothing is a very cheap way to express individuality. I'm not knocking it for someone that needs to do it, but at the end of the day, if what makes me different than you is that, we look pretty much right. We're both wearing black jackets, white shirts, no ties. So we look at beards, we look the same. You look a little younger, less gray hair. But, if our individuality is that I'm wearing different clothing than you, that's pretty weak. Individuality is not in clothing. Individuality is in our thoughts and our actions. Now, while we're younger, a lot of our actions are going to look the same. But as we get older, that thought process, that development that you're working on yourself, if you've been working on your midos, for example, if you've been working on yourself as a person, as you get older, Bez Hashem, you will be able to give and offer and express, and your individuality will shine. While you're in yeshiva, there's limited opportunities for individuality to shine. And if you try too hard, it's, you just stand out. But inside yourself, individuality is found inside the person, and then it blossoms as you get older. So it's very important you think for yourself. You could think for yourself. Your Rosh Hashiva gives a shmooze on a certain topic. I may get in trouble for saying this. And you don't agree. You don't like it. Individuality means that I have a brain. My Rebbe taught us a chiddush, right, Perez Zatzal. He taught us that just because your Rebbe said something, you need to understand it. You have to be responsible for it. If your Rebbe tells you to do something, if your Rebbe tells you to shoot somebody, you have to understand what he's telling you. You can't just walk around, my Rebbe said it. You have to own whatever your Rebbe taught you. I'm not saying there's never a place to say, I don't understand that my Rebbe said it, but you'll have to own it. So this Bacher, who you want individuality, when the Rosh Hashiva is talking, try to understand what he's saying. If you don't understand it, go ask him. If he doesn't have the time for you, talk to some other Rebbe or Rav and say, I don't know if I understand this. Even in Gemara learning, so many times the Rebbe says a pshat in the Taisvis, in the Gemara, and I don't like it. So Bacher conforms, okay, but that's a pshat. That's what the Rosh Hashiva said. No, that's not Torah. Torah is yours. So individuality is in our mind. We have to teach Bachram to have individuality in their thoughts, in their development. It doesn't have to be with clothing. Every yeshiva could have its own dress code. But to teach them to be independent thinkers, that's what my Rebbe taught. My Rebbe Per was a very unique person. And he really taught us to think for ourselves. And that's why Baruch Hashem, his Talmidim are quite different. But the funny thing is that a lot of times people can actually spot us out and say, oh, you probably learned by Ray Per. Because there's stands out the uniqueness. But he taught us to think for ourselves.
So you mentioned that clothing is probably the cheapest way of expressing yourself. You also mentioned that it typically weeds itself out. when one gets into adulthood, just because of the nature of having kids and a family makeup. But you do see so many 40, 50, 60 year olds who they're going to wear a $5,000 tie, which is essentially their way of saying, I'm going to spend $5,000 for you to approve of me. Or I am going to spend a ridiculous amount of money on a $500,000 car, which it's not that much more comfortable than a $40,000 car. It's a $500,000 you're going to spend for other people to observe and say, hey, this guy is unique. This guy is impressive. So it seems like a major. So you disagree that it's not coming from there?
I disagree with you that that's their goal. Their goal is not to establish individuality. Their goal is to receive approval. Their goal is to receive kavod. And that goes back to what I said before. Our job as parents and mechanchim, foremost, I think this is the most important thing in chinuch, as I mentioned before, is to build people's self-esteem. When we don't feel good about ourselves, we look for other people's approval. If I wasn't the biggest Talmud Chacham, but now I'm very successful financially, and by the way, many of them suffered when they were in yeshiva being the shvacha bacher, and now they have a chance to finally get people's approval. Now they have a chance to get the Rosh Yeshiva coming, asking him for money, and be honored. I'm not saying people get honored for this reason. It's a big chesed to get honored. But people want to establish themselves to get other people's approval. I wrote a whole English sefer on kavod. I don't know if you saw it. It's called Run After the Right Kavod. The more someone feels good about themselves, the less they need other people's approval. As well, if we really work on ourselves, we become more intelligent. Oh, because I'm driving a fancy car and everyone is impressed, that's a reason that I should feel good about myself?
Right? Isn't it like
No,
people should be embarrassed? You should be embarrassed. You have to spend that much money.
I'm not judging anybody. People, I'm very against judging people's spendings. People say, why is he flying private? Why is he spending the money? I don't judge any people's spendings. I don't have the kind of money, so I don't have the opportunity to withhold. If I had the kind of money and was not spending it, we could talk. I don't judge people's spendings, and many of those people are so generous with tzedakah and such giving people. I don't judge other people's spending. I think people only judge other people's spending because they're jealous, etc. Unless they're a rav who's trying to be mechanech his kehila. It doesn't bother me. I don't look.
No,
I don't think. So I want to say it like this. I'm just saying. I'm not judging why the guy's driving his fancy car. Is it just to get people's approval, etc., etc., etc. But there's no question that there's a lot of that. And you'll say, well, isn't that shallow? That this is what you think is valuable. They have the fancy car, but it's not just about the car, right? If I heard this from someone else recently, so it's not my idea, but it's quite simple. If I'm driving a $500,000 car, then you understand that I'm running a successful business, and I feel good about myself that I run a successful business. So instead of taking advertisements out there and saying I have a successful business, my car, my watch, my suit, my bar mitzvah, my wedding shows that I'm a successful person financially. But I will say that if we were giving the kavod to people when they're younger, people would have a less need for it and less interest in it. And also, there's another thing here. If the people around us, in general, weren't so... Listen, if you had people... I'm not saying I'm above Gashmias, but all I could tell you is that, and again, obviously, I'm a Rosh Yeshiva, I'm in Chinuch, so I'm just giving an example. But if everyone around a person was like me, they're not pulling up in the $500,000 car, I'll probably make them feel good because I'm nice. So it's such a nice car. But at the end of the day, they're not bringing me the car. Hopefully they'll bring me a Gemara. They'll give me a Vart because they know I'm not going crazy. So we have to raise people to feel good about themselves because they're Yidden and proud Jews. And if we were more proud of being Jews, we'd be a little bit less proud about things like money.